I want to let you know that this story deals with sensitive and emotional topics. Please watch with care if you find such content difficult. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon in Milwaukee. No sirens, no shouting, just the sound of life going on until it didn't. Inside one duplex on the west side, something had gone wrong. No one heard a struggle. No one saw anyone leave. But by sunset, someone who should have been safe inside that home was gone. And here's the part that still haunts people to this day. There was no forced entry, no open door, no sign of how it happened. Quick thing before we start, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? What's the weather like? And tell me, what case do you want next? Leave it in the comments. I go through everyone. Make sure you're subscribed. Let's go. 1 second, everything was normal. The next, silence. What happened inside that house would tear a hole through an entire community and leave detectives staring at one impossible question. How can a person vanish without ever stepping outside? October 25th, 2023. For Darren Rhea McCree, that day started like any other. Her little boy, Prince, wasn't feeling great, so she decided to keep him home from school. That's what any mom would do, right? Let him rest, keep him close. Their home was simple, half of a duplex, but it was their little world. Bedtime stories, cartoons, snacks, all the normal stuff that makes a kid feel safe. The day was quiet, nothing out of the ordinary. Later, when Prince said he wanted to go play some video games down in the basement, it didn't seem like a big deal. Downstairs lived two neighbors, 27-year-old David Piatura and 15-year-old Eric Mendoza. To Prince, they weren't neighbors. They were the big guys next door, the cool ones who let him hang out sometimes. He trusted them. Darren Rhea figured it was fine. She was upstairs, close by. What could go wrong in your own home? About an hour passed. The kind of peaceful silence every parent knows, Ella. Cartoons off, dishes done, just another lazy day. Then Darren Rhea called out, "Prince!" No answer. She tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. You know that moment when a parent goes from slightly annoyed to straight up uneasy? That's where she was. She went to the top of the basement stairs and called again. Silence. Not the playful kind, the heavy kind. The kind that makes your stomach twist. So she walked downstairs. The basement lights were on, the video game console was glowing, but the room was empty. David and Eric were there. Prince wasn't. She asked, "Where's Prince?" The neighbor said he'd been there playing games, but got upset and went back upstairs to his mom. Okay, that could make sense. Kids change moods fast. So she went back up, figuring maybe he was hiding under his blanket or playing a game of pretend. She checked his room, empty. Closet, nothing. Under the bed, just toys. The kitchen, the bathroom, the living room, every room came up empty. That's when the panic hit. Every second started to feel longer. She ran outside, the yard, the porch, behind the bushes. No Prince, nowhere. He was just gone. Her hands shaking, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. When Milwaukee police showed up, the house turned into a scene of pure chaos and confusion. Officers moved carefully, methodically, retracing every step. They went through the house again, room by room, while Darren Rhea stood there, knowing deep down what their faces would confirm: her son wasn't there. The officers talked to the neighbors. Same story. Prince played games, got mad, went upstairs. But something wasn't adding up. The doors were locked. No windows open. No signs of a break-in. If Prince really did go upstairs, where was he? There was no trail, no clue, nothing. The search spilled outside. K-9 units showed up, their barks cutting through the night air. Neighbors stepped out onto porches, asking questions, offering flashlights, hoping for any sign. The whole block turned into a search grid. But as the hours dragged on, a darker question started hanging over everything -1 no one wanted to say out loud. If little Prince didn't walk out that front door, and he wasn't inside that house, then where could he possibly be? Before he became a headline or a police case number, he was just Prince. And for his family, That name fit him perfectly. He wasn't just another missing child on a poster. He was the heartbeat of his home. The kind of 5-year-old who could light up a room just by walking into it. Before we talk about what happened to him, you gotta understand who he was, because that's where the pain of this story really hits. Prince McCree was obsessed with superheroes, especially Spider-Man. To him, Spider-Man wasn't just a character, he was a way of life. The furniture became skyscrapers. The hallway turned into a city skyline. Every jump, every laugh was another heroic mission. He didn't just watch cartoons, he lived them. You could say he had that kind of energy that makes adults smile without even realizing it. He was smart too, curious about everything. He loved books, sitting with his mom while she read out loud, tracing the words with his little finger like he was learning the code to the world. His dad, Duran, said his son was pure joy, always laughing, always moving, always asking questions, and you could tell that wasn't just a proud father talking, it was the truth. Prince was that kind of kid every parent hopes for. He believed, like most 5-year-olds do, that the world was good and people were kind. He trusted everyone, especially the two neighbors from downstairs, 27-year-old David Piatura and 15-year-old Eric Mendoza. To him, they weren't neighbors. They were the big guys, the cool older kids who let him hang around. He looked up to them, and when he went down to the basement that afternoon, he wasn't walking into danger. In his mind, he was just going to hang out with his friends, play some games, and have fun. It's important to remember that when we talk about these cases, behind the sirens, the tape, the headlines, there's always a real kid, a real person. Prince wasn't some faceless victim. He was a little boy who loved Spider-Man, who danced in his pajamas, who believed everyone around him had good intentions. That's why his disappearance hit the community so hard. People saw his picture, that big smile, those bright eyes, and they didn't see a stranger. They saw their own kid, their nephew, their student. So that night, when police and volunteers spread out across Milwaukee with flashlights and dogs, they weren't just searching for a missing child. They were searching for Prince, the 5-year-old who dreamed of saving the world. And even as hours passed and the temperature dropped, every person out there was holding on to one fragile hope, that somehow he was still alive, waiting to be found. As the sun went down over Milwaukee, what started as a simple missing child call had turned into a full-blown emergency. You could feel it, that shift in energy, when officers realized they're not just looking for a kid who wandered off, they're looking for a child who might have been taken. Every cop, every volunteer, every canine handler out there knew the clock was ticking. Flashlights cut through backyards and alleys, beams sweeping over fences and empty playgrounds. Canine seconds worked in grid patterns, sniffing for any trace of 5-year-old Prince McCree. The whole neighborhood had gone from quiet to crawling with police cars, red and blue lights bouncing off windows, and still nothing. For investigators, one thing was clear. The last two people to see Prince alive were his downstairs neighbors, 27-year-old David Piatura and 15-year-old Eric Mendoza. So detectives sat them down one at a time and started walking through that afternoon minute by minute. On paper, these two didn't look like trouble. David was unemployed, Eric was just a teenager. No priors, no red flags. They didn't fit the profile of the kind of people who'd harm a child. They came across as nervous but cooperative, the "we're just as shocked as you are" type. Their story? Same as before. Prince came down, played some video games, got upset, and said he was heading back upstairs to his mom. Then he left. End of story. At first, that sounded reasonable. Kids lose interest fast, right? But detectives couldn't ignore the one detail that didn't sit right. If Prince really had gone back upstairs, his mom would have seen him. She searched the whole place top to bottom, and every single door and window in that duplex was locked tight. There was no way a 5-year-old walked out of there unseen. But the officers couldn't just accuse them to shit. Not yet. They had no hard evidence. So, for the moment, they had to work with what they had. The assumption, maybe Prince somehow slipped outside. The search widened. Patrol cars rolled through the streets. Parks were checked. Flyers went up. That smiling face, the Spider-Man kid, was everywhere. Someone brought up an Amber Alert, but here's where bureaucracy got in the way. The situation didn't fit the state's criteria. At that point, police couldn't prove an abduction, and the rules for issuing an alert were painfully strict. So, while the system waited for confirmation, time, the most precious thing in any child disappearance, kept slipping away. Still, detectives knew they needed more than interviews and hunches. In 2023, there's one witness that doesn't lie: cameras. They started canvassing the neighborhood, door to door, asking residents to check doorbell footage and outdoor security feeds, and that's when they got something. A camera across the street had a perfect view of the McCree home. Detectives brought the footage back to the station and started scrubbing through it, hour by hour, frame by frame. They saw everyday life unfold: the mail carrier, a few passing cars, Darren Rhea leaving and coming home. They watched the exact moment when Prince walked into the house that afternoon. Then they kept watching. The timeline lined up with what the neighbors said. This was the time when Prince supposedly got upset and went upstairs. The detectives kept their eyes glued to the screen. They watched every minute until the first patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. But the one thing they didn't see, not once, was Prince leaving the house, not through the front door, not through the back. The camera had caught it all. Prince McCree went into that house, and he never came out. Inside the Milwaukee Police Department, detectives sat in a dimly lit evidence room watching the footage again and again. The video didn't stutter, it didn't glitch. There was no mystery in what it showed. 5-year-old Prince McCree walked into his home on the afternoon of October 25th, and that's where his trail ended. He never came back out. That realization hit everyone in that room like a punch to the gut. The case they thought was a missing child search was no longer that. It had shifted fast into something darker. The explanation no one wanted to believe was suddenly the only one that made sense. Prince hadn't disappeared into thin air. Something had happened to him inside that duplex. And there were only two people who could explain it: David Piatura and Eric Mendoza. When detectives brought Piatura back in, the tone changed completely. The friendly neighbor act, done. The search for a missing kid, over. Now it was an interrogation. The room was small, fluorescent, cold, designed to make you feel the weight of your own words. Detectives started calm. They let David talk. "Tell us again," they said. "What happened when Prince came downstairs?" He repeated the story he'd already told. Prince played games, got upset, said he was going upstairs. That's it. He added some details, like he was trying to make it sound more believable. And to anyone else, it might have worked. But detectives know the signs, the way someone's eyes shift, the little pauses when they're building a lie. They let him talk himself deeper, stacking lie on top of lie until the story looked solid enough to knock over. Then came the pivot. "So, David," one detective said, leaning in, "you're absolutely sure you saw him go upstairs?" David said yes, without hesitation, and that's when the detective dropped the hammer. That's interesting, because we've been reviewing security footage from a camera across the street. It shows your front door clear as day. We saw Prince go in, but we never saw him come out. That's the kind of moment when the air leaves the room. You could see it on David's face, the way his confidence cracked. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. He tried to deflect. Maybe the camera missed it. Maybe Prince went out the back. But the detectives were ready for that. They'd already checked. Every angle, every door, every window, nothing. There was no back way out. Every time he tried to build a new excuse, they tore it down. The timeline didn't match. The details shifted. His answers started looping on themselves. It was like watching a wall crumble brick by brick. By now, the detectives weren't asking if something bad happened. They knew it had. The only question left was, what? And that's when the focus of the entire investigation flipped. The neighborhood search, the K9 sweeps, all that was done. The truth wasn't out there somewhere. It was right there, inside that duplex. People don't lie about a missing child for no reason. When they do, it's because they're covering for something unthinkable. The detectives knew it. They could feel it. And they were about to find out exactly what. Once David Piatura's story fell apart, everything changed. That duplex on 77th Street was no longer just a family home. It was a crime scene. Detectives weren't searching for a missing child anymore. They were searching for proof of something unthinkable. You could feel the shift in tone the second the search teams went back inside. The urgency was gone, replaced with quiet determination and dread. Every cop on that scene knew what they were probably about to find. They started in the basement, the last place anyone saw Prince alive. It was small, dimly lit, the kind of space where silence feels heavy. Forensic techs moved carefully, scanning every inch. They weren't looking for something obvious, they were looking for the smallest signs that something terrible had happened there. A drop of blood, a scuff mark, a trace someone tried to clean up. Things that don't lie, even when people do. At the same time, another team spread out around the property. If Prince wasn't inside the house, then he had to be somewhere close. And that thought alone made everyone's stomach turn. They started searching the yards, alleys, patches of grass, even the trash area behind the duplex, because in a case like this, that's what it sometimes comes down to. You check the places no one wants to think about, and that's where it ended. Behind the building, an officer lifted the lid of a large dumpster, and everything stopped. Inside were several heavy-duty trash bags. It took only one glance to know what they had found. The area was sealed off instantly. No radio chatter, no shouting, just silence. The confirmation hit like a wave. They had found him. The call went out quietly, the kind of call no officer ever wants to make. Back at the command post, the words spread in hushed tones, almost like people didn't want to hear themselves say it out loud. For Darren Rhea and Duron McCree, that moment was every parent's worst nightmare realized. There are no words that make sense when someone tells you your child is gone. It's not information, it's impact. Their world shattered in an instant. Their son, the bright, happy boy who loved Spider-Man, wasn't coming home. Back at the scene, officers moved slowly, treating every inch of that space with care. The house, the yard, the dumpster, all of it was now evidence of something that shouldn't have been possible. The story David Piatura had told about Prince walking upstairs and leaving wasn't just a lie, it was a cover-up. While police were out searching the streets and neighbors were printing flyers, the truth had been hidden just a few feet away. The timeline came into focus. The lie about Prince going back to his mom wasn't random, it was deliberate. While Darren Rhea ran from room to room calling her son's name, while officers organized search grids, the people responsible were already trying to cover up what they'd done. Investigators didn't have all the answers yet, but the pieces were coming together in a horrifying way. Whatever had happened down in that basement, whatever caused a 5-year-old boy to vanish from his own home, hadn't been an accident. It was intentional. It was brutal. And the truth they were about to learn was even worse than anyone could imagine. Inside the interrogation room, the air felt heavy, that kind of silence where even the hum of the light sounds loud. The search was over. The lies had crumbled. Detectives weren't chasing shadows anymore. They already knew the truth. What they needed now was the why. David Piatura sat slouched in his chair, staring at the table. His hands shook just slightly, maybe from nerves, maybe from the weight of everything closing in. The detectives didn't start with accusations. They didn't need to. One of them just asked quietly, "David, why did you do it?" That simple question broke whatever wall he had left. The mask of the concerned neighbor fell apart, and what came next wasn't a dramatic confession, it was emptiness. A man talking about something he could no longer explain, something that made no sense even to himself. He said there had been tension, frustration, maybe just a moment that spiraled out of control. In his own words, it started small, 10, an argument, a sudden loss of control, and it ended in tragedy. There was no reason, no plan, just an act that destroyed everything in seconds. As he spoke, detectives didn't interrupt. They just listened, each word landing like a punch in the gut. He admitted that 15-year-old Eric Mendoza had been there too. Both of them had seen Prince that day, and instead of protecting a little boy who trusted them, they broke that trust in the worst possible way. The details of what happened in that basement didn't need repeating. The room didn't need any more darkness than it already had. Afterward, Piatura told them he panicked. He tried to hide what had happened, covering up the truth instead of facing it. But no matter how much someone tries to bury what they've done, the truth always finds its way out. And it did. Even after saying it all, there was still one thing he couldn't explain. Why? Why harm a child who looked up to him? Why destroy something so pure, so undeserving of pain? There was no answer, just silence and regret. When it was over, detectives sat there for a long time. No one spoke. The how and what were clear, but the why, the part that might have made sense of it all, never came. And maybe that's the hardest part to accept, both for the investigators and for everyone listening now. Because behind every case, behind every headline, there's always that haunting question, why would anyone do this? Prince McCree's story will always be a reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it hides in familiar faces, and that's what makes it so terrifying. When a case like this hits the courtroom, the atmosphere changes completely. The energy that filled the police station, the rush, the investigation, the search, turns into something heavier, something permanent. This is where everything stops moving, where the truth stands still. For David Piatura, this was the end of the line. The man who'd once claimed to be the worried neighbor was now sitting in a courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit, surrounded by armed deputies. On the other side sat the family of 5-year-old Prince McCree, his mother, his father, and relatives who hadn't missed a single hearing. You could feel the weight in that room. It wasn't anger anymore, it was grief. Deep, permanent grief. This wasn't just another trial. Even people who worked in that courthouse for decades said it felt different. The details were too much, too senseless, too personal. When Judge Jane Carroll took her seat, the room fell completely silent. You could hear people breathing. The prosecution walked the court through everything, the timeline, the surveillance footage, the confession. There was no mystery left to solve, only the task of putting a legal name to a moral crime. And when it came time for the judge to speak, her voice carried that same quiet shock everyone felt.
I've been a lawyer for a very long time and a judge now for a fair amount of time, and I don't recall a case that is as this one. What happened on October 25th of 2023 that Prince McCree, say his name, Prince McCree, of his life, of his future, of his love and his bond with his family members is
Her words weren't about punishment, they were about the unthinkable betrayal that had happened inside that duplex. She called out the total destruction of trust, FIA, how a grown man had turned a child's safe space into a nightmare. Then she looked straight at Piatura and didn't sugarcoat a thing.
An innocent should never have taken place. All he wanted to do was be your friend. All he wanted to do was play Spider-Man, to be a superhero, to read books, to do the things that 5-year-olds do, play on the playground. According to everyone that's testified today, he looked up to you as his role model like a big brother. And in his home, in his safe zone, what did you do? But Prince came to the basement, and you and Eric.
She reminded him and everyone there that this wasn't just about what he did, but who he did it to. A little boy who saw him as a friend, who had no reason to be afraid. Then came the moment that made the room stop breathing. Piatura's turn to speak. Most people expect an apology, some kind of remorse. But what came out of his mouth was something else entirely. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a denial. It was cold acceptance. The words of someone who knew exactly what he'd done and had already judged himself.
With what the last the aunt said about with the death penalty, it is a shame that we don't have it here, because for my involvement, I feel right. But we only have life without parole, and I think that I should get life without parole for my involvement. And I know that goes against what Mr. Russell says, but regret and guilt, I had a lot of time to think about everything, and this shouldn't have happened. And if I had a chance to change it, I would, but we can't go back in time. We can't change things that have happened. All we can do is continue on forward, and Prince can't do that no more. But I can, and it ain't right. And I don't think the family would. I know they said that they, to be completely honest, I'm surprised they didn't try to go at me 100%. And for what they did, that's big of them, I'm not going to lie. But if there's no possible way I should get parole. I don't think I should. I don't. But I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive myself. They show that they're capable of forgiving me, but I wouldn't be able to forgive me in that position. I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
Even the officer standing guard didn't move. His statement was short but haunting, not because it justified anything, but because it didn't even try. He said he couldn't forgive himself, that there was no excuse, no redemption, and for once no one disagreed. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison with no chance of parole, it wasn't met with applause or relief. It was quiet, just a long, painful silence. Because for the McCree family, there was no version of justice that could ever feel like enough. As for Eric Mendoza, the 15-year-old accused of taking part in the killing, his case was still moving through the system. His future would play out in a separate courtroom. But for Piatura, it was over. He'd spend the rest of his life behind bars, and even that felt too easy for what he took away. The gavel came down, the crowd stood up, and while everyone else walked out of that courtroom into the daylight, one family carried a sentence of their own, a lifetime without Prince. A life sentence for the man who took Prince's life didn't end the pain for his family. The courtroom quiets down, the cameras turn off, but for the people left behind, the silence doesn't go away. The McCree family would never get their little boy back. But they made a decision early on. Prince's story wasn't going to end with tragedy. If they couldn't save him, they were going to make sure his name saved others. When the nightmare began, Duranry and Duran ran into a wall no parent should ever face. During those early desperate hours when every minute mattered, police couldn't issue an Amber Alert for Prince. The reason? His case didn't fit the official criteria. The system required solid proof of an abduction, something like a witness, a suspect vehicle, or clear evidence of kidnapping. But in Prince's case, there was none of that. He was missing from his own home, no forced entry, no signs of struggle. It didn't check the boxes. In that delay cost time no one could afford to lose. That failure stuck with the McCree family. Even after the trial ended, even after the cameras moved on, that detail, that rule, kept echoing in their minds. They decided to fight it, to change it. They turned their grief into action. They reached out to lawmakers, shared their story, and refused to let the system ignore what had happened. They wanted a new rule, -1, that said, a child doesn't have to be kidnapped by a stranger to deserve an immediate search. They wanted every missing child to matter from the first call, not hours later when it's too late. Their push reached the Wisconsin state capitol. Legislators listened, and out of that unimaginable tragedy came something that could actually make a difference. It was called the Prince Act. The law expanded the criteria for Amber Alerts, giving police more flexibility to issue them when a young child disappears, even if the situation doesn't fit the old, narrow definition of abduction. No more waiting for proof when a kid could be in danger. The system that failed Prince was restructured in his name. When the act passed, the McCree family stood together, not as victims, but as advocates. They weren't talking about how he died. They were talking about what he left behind, about how their son, who loved Spider-Man, became a real-life hero for other children.
Flowing with emotions, Prince McCree's family held on to each other tightly. The 5-year-old boy always wanted to be a superhero. The new law named after him aims to save others from tragedy.
Is another way for him to be a hero.
Deron McCree is Prince's father. He believes the Prince Act, which expands criteria to issue alerts for missing children, honors his son's life.
Prince's story didn't end in that basement. It lived on through the law that bears his name, a law that could be the reason another child gets found in time. The next time an Amber Alert flashes across someone's phone, that's his legacy. The evil that took his life didn't win. It created something that will protect others. Prince McCree may have only lived 5 short years, but through the Prince Act, his light keeps shining, saving lives, one alert at a time. I want to let you know that this story deals with sensitive and emotional topics. Please watch with care if you find such content difficult. Every 911 dispatcher has that one call, the one that hits different, the one you just can't shake, no matter how tough you are. It's the kind of call that splits your life into a before and an after. And for first responders in Sherrill, New York, that moment happened on a bright July morning back in 2011. Now listen, this call wasn't chilling because of what was said. It was that raw, gut-wrenching screaming in the background. You know, something's gone way off the rails when the noises under the words just rip through the phone line and hit you in the chest. Quick thing before we start, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? What's the weather like? And tell me, what case do you want next? Leave it in the comments. I go through everyone. Make sure you're subscribed. Let's go. The address was on Noyes Street in what they call the smallest city in America. Picture it. A tree-lined block where neighbors wave, kids leave their bikes out front, and the loudest thing all summer is usually someone's lawnmower. But y'all, on this morning, all that perfect peace was about to get shattered in ways nobody could imagine. When the first squad car rolled up, everything was dead quiet. The house looked like any family home, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to tip you off. But every cop's got that spidey sense, and they knew, walking up on that porch, something was seriously wrong. Nobody answered the door. And when they tried to get in, the door wouldn't budge. It was barricaded from the inside. And here's what you got to ask yourself. What's running through a first responder's mind in a moment like that? Hostage, home invasion, gone sideways. I mean, every option's a nightmare. The chaos on the call had gone silent now, replaced by that kind of heavy, waiting quiet that honestly makes your skin crawl. When they finally breached the door, the first floor looked almost stage spotless. Toys in their baskets, family photos smiling from the mantle, whole place radiating with that happy home vibe. But the cops didn't relax. They moved slow toward the stairs, their nerves on edge. As they started up, that's when things took a turn, signs of a struggle. Hints that violence had just swept through. Upstairs, as they opened the master bedroom door, what they found stopped everyone in their tracks. The scene in that room, it defied words. Officers froze, their training kicking in, adrenaline pumping, and all you can do is wonder what goes through their minds, because nobody comes back from witnessing that. Before the house on Noyes Street became a scene out of a nightmare, it was just a regular home filled with laughter, music, and the kind of chaos only kids can bring. And at the heart of it all, a little girl with a smile that could light up the whole block, 6-year-old Lauren Belius. Now, folks, to get why this story hits so hard, you gotta understand Lauren was way more than just another name on the news. She was a twin, bonded to her sister Leah in a way only twins truly get. They were basically attached at the hip, always in their own world, swapping secrets and dreams. Losing Lauren didn't just mean Leah lost a sister, it meant she lost a piece of herself. Lauren had that fire, always on the move, always laughing, never doing anything halfway. She'd tear up the soccer field with her signature pigtails flying behind her, then turn around and crush it at ballet class with the same energy, all grace and confidence. She loved every animal she met, and honestly, the way she cared for even the tiniest critters puts a lot of adults to shame. But what really made Lauren stand out was her heart. She didn't just care, she gave in a way that's rare for anyone, let alone a little kid. Check this out. A few months before that awful day, Lauren decided to cut her long, beautiful hair and donate it to Locks of Love to help other children going through tough medical battles. Imagine that, a 6-year-old doing something that selfless just to put a smile on another kid's face. That's the kind of girl Lauren was. Her family, they talk about the pride in her eyes after that haircut, how she couldn't stop smiling because she knew she'd done something good, and that right there tells you everything you need to know about Lauren Belius. She wasn't just a daughter, a sister, or a friend. She was that rare soul who made her world brighter, one small act of kindness at a time. So when we talk about loss and about justice, don't let yourself forget this isn't some cold case file. This is a story about a real little girl who was loved beyond words. Someone with a world of potential ahead of her, a chance to run down more soccer fields and steal more hearts along the way. Knowing who Lauren was, her spirit, and the huge heart she carried around makes what happened that much tougher to stomach. That's why every question in this case stings. Because this isn't just about catching a criminal. It's about honoring the memory of a kid who truly made the world better. For any single mom of 3, piecing life back together after divorce takes real courage. Every day turns into a tightrope, walk school runs, scraped knees, late night homework. Somehow Allison Bellius managed it with grace, making her kids the center of her world. Then David Tribblecock entered her life, and y'all, let me tell you, at first glance he looked like just what this family needed. They met on the job, nothing fancy. David came off as smooth, dependable, the guy who actually pays attention when you talk, and you know what? He didn't flinch at the idea of a ready-made family. Allison, who'd been through real heartache, suddenly had hope again. Their relationship grew bit by bit. Then came that huge step, introducing him to the kids. Every single parent out there knows this is a leap of faith. You're not just bringing a partner into your life, but asking your kids to open up to someone new. For Allison, it felt like a miracle. The kids adored David. He didn't just date her, he fit right in with the crew. He took Alex, Lauren's big brother, fishing, those bonding moments that really mean something to a growing boy. He was always out back, pushing Lauren and Leah on the swings, his deep laugh blending with their happy shouts. Soccer games, ballet recitals, movie nights, David was there, fully in it with the family. From the outside, and for a long time even for Allison and the kids, this was what a comeback story looks like, a blended family finally getting a shot at real happiness. David moved in, and that house went from a fortress of survival to a home full of hope. Allison herself said he was her best friend, the one she could count on through anything. And here's the creepiest part, folks. Knowing what we do now, we all look back searching for cracks, for warning signs in those happy moments, some shadow behind his smile. But the truth? There was nothing, no hint. To everyone inside and out, he was the perfect guy, the dream stepdad. Think about it. What's scarier? A monster who looks like a monster, or a monster who looks like the guy next door? David Trebblecock wasn't some shadow lurking in the dark. He was the one reading bedtime stories, patching scraped elbows, trusted 100% with Allison's kids. He didn't push to get in. He was welcomed open arms, open hearts. And that's what makes this story so haunting. It's not just about what happened in one locked room. It's about the man they let in, the man they called family. How does the person who brings so much peace and laughter also bring total destruction? It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. The loving partner and the brutal killer were the same man. So, who was David Trebblecock deep down? What was hiding behind that perfect family man's smile? In stories where things slowly go off the rails, it's never just one big disaster. It's always a bunch of tiny cracks that creep up when nobody's looking. For David Trebblecock, the guy everyone thought was Mr. Perfect, the warning signs started popping up months before that July morning. At first, they were subtle, easy to write off as bad luck or stress. But soon, those cracks turned into gaping holes nobody could ignore. First came the job trouble, the steady gig that made him seem like a solid catch. He up and quit, no long talks, no warning. Said he wanted more time with family, but the vibe at home just got weird. David wasn't some chill stay-at-home dad. He was watching everything now, keeping tabs. His world shrank down to just the house, and the tension slowly amped up. Then, paranoia creeped in. At first, David complained about shady coworkers, as if folks were out to get him, but it escalated quickly. Suddenly, the neighbors were acting strange, maybe following him. Strangers on the street looked suspicious. For Allison, it was impossible to wrap her head around where was the easygoing guy she fell for. And the Bible? Out of nowhere, David started carrying it everywhere. Not reading it, not quoting it, just clutching it like it was some kind of magic shield. He'd sit there, white-knuckled, holding onto it tight. Whatever battle was going on in his head, nobody else could see it. Audience, let's pause right now. Imagine being in Allison's shoes. Your partner, the one your kids adore, starts morphing into someone you barely recognize. What do? Most people make excuses, right? He's stressed, it's a rough patch, he'll bounce back. You hang on to hope that the person you love will show up again. But then comes the bombshell, the moment that shatters everything. David breaks down one night, sits Allison down, and just unloads. He admits to addiction, says he cheated, and then drops a confession nobody can ever unhear. He's had a encounter with a minor back in the day. Let's stop and think. What would you do? The guy living under your roof, sharing dinners with your kids, confesses to being the very nightmare parents fear most. These weren't just red flags now. This was a siren that should have sent him packing instantly. But real talk, love messes with logic. David didn't act like a monster. He acted like a broken man, begging for help, promising change, swearing up and down that counseling would fix him. All those months of trust? He used them to plead for a second chance. Faced with this horror, Allison chose hope over fear. Chose to see the man she knew, not the one he confessed to being. She put her faith in love, in healing, in redemption, and tragically, that choice to hope and forgive instead of protect would become the single most devastating mistake she ever made. July 29th, 2011. It started like any other bright summer morning in Sherrill, New York fire. Quiet, warm, and calm, the kind of day where the air feels lazy and life feels predictable. Birds outside, a lawnmower in the distance, sunlight spilling across the neighborhood. Nobody in that town could have guessed how quickly peace would turn to panic, or how one family's world was about to change forever. Inside the Belius home, Allison stirred awake just like any other morning. Her kids were still asleep, soft footsteps padding upstairs, the usual household sounds that make a home feel alive. But downstairs, David Treblecock had already started acting strange, calm, focused, like a man working through a plan only he understood. There was no shouting, no sign of rage, just a cold, methodical quiet that didn't belong in a loving home. He went through the house slowly, checking doors, moving objects around in eerie silence. At one point, he led the family dog into the garage and closed the door behind him. It was a small action, but it told a story. It was as if one of control, not chaos. It was as if he wanted to remove every possible obstacle from what he was about to do. Upstairs, Allison heard faint noises at first. The scrape of wood, a dull thump, something shifting against her bedroom door. At first, she thought maybe one of the kids was playing, but then she noticed the silence that followed, that unnatural kind of quiet that makes your chest tighten. She sat up, listening. Then she tried to open the door, and it wouldn't move. Her first reaction was confusion. Then fear crept in. She called out, her voice shaking just enough to betray it. On the other side of the door came a calm, flat reply. Just go back to sleep. The words didn't sound like David anymore. They sounded detached, rehearsed, and deeply wrong. That's when instinct kicked in. Any parent knows the difference between ordinary tension and danger. Allison's heart pounded as she shoved at the door, realizing something heavy was blocking it. It didn't make sense. Why would David do that? Why lock her in? Then came the sound that no parent can ever forget, her child's voice, crying out. Fear turned into pure adrenaline. She didn't think, she just moved. Allison threw her shoulder against the door again and again, feeling it bend but not give. Each impact sent a jolt of pain through her, but she kept going. All she could think about was her kids, their safety, their lives. She shouted for help, her voice echoing down the quiet street outside. Somewhere, a neighbor stirred, wondering what was happening. Finally, with one last desperate push, the door splintered open. The house that had once felt warm and familiar now looked like a stranger's home, silent, eerie, frozen in time. Allison's eyes darted from room to room, searching, calling out names. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something she couldn't explain. And then she saw David, standing in the hallway, eyes blank, movements robotic, as if he wasn't really there. What happened next was fast, chaotic, and surreal. Allison rushed forward, driven by something primal, a mother's instinct stronger than fear. She didn't stop to think or question, she just acted. Every part of her body was focused on one mission: protect her children at all costs. The moments that followed were pure survival. There was no logic, no order, BNIS, just frantic motion, pleading, panic, and the desperate need to stop the unthinkable. Allison fought not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, with every ounce of strength that love could create. Neighbors later recalled hearing screams, cries for help, the kind that pierce through walls and make you freeze in place. A few rushed outside, not knowing whether to run toward the noise or away from it. Someone grabbed a phone and dialed 911, their voice trembling as they tried to explain what they were hearing. Inside that house, time slowed. For Allison, every second stretched into eternity. Her thoughts blurred into one looping question: why? Why was this happening? Why the man she trusted? Why this moment, this home? And yet, even in the chaos, she didn't stop. She called out for her daughter, for help, for someone to wake her from what felt like a nightmare she couldn't escape. The house that once held laughter and bedtime stories now felt like a maze of heartbreak and confusion. When officers finally arrived, they broke through the front door to a scene of devastation. Not graphic, not cinematic, but emotionally shattering. A mother on the floor, trembling, hands shaking, doing everything humanly possible to save the child she loved more than life itself. Her clothes torn, her face streaked with tears, whispering prayers no one could quite hear. Paramedics moved quickly, working with the kind of precision that comes from training and heartbreak all at once. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the family they'd waved to every morning was suddenly surrounded by flashing lights and stretchers. That morning would forever be known in Cheryl as the day the quiet stopped. For Allison, it wasn't just the worst day of her life. It was the moment everything she'd believed about love, safety, and family collapsed into dust. But through it all, she never stopped fighting. Even in her darkest hour, she showed what it means to be a mother, to run toward danger, to stand between her children and chaos, and to keep fighting even when the world is falling apart around you. As the sun climbed higher in the sky that day, the house on Noyes Street stood still, surrounded by police tape and disbelief. The air was thick with grief, but beneath it, courage, the kind of courage that doesn't make headlines, but defines who we are when everything is taken away. And for Allison, that morning would never end. It would replay in her mind forever. The sounds, the silence, the heartbreak. But somewhere inside that unbearable pain was a small, stubborn truth. She did everything she could. She fought until the very end. And that's something no one, not even tragedy, can take from her. When first responders arrived at the Belius home, the world seemed to tilt off its axis. Flashing lights painted the quiet neighborhood red and blue, the hum of sirens faded into the distance, and everything else fell eerily still. Inside, what they found was not a crime scene in the sensational sense. It was heartbreak frozen in time. Allison was alive but shaken to her core. Her voice trembled when she tried to speak, her hands trembling even as paramedics wrapped her in a blanket. There was shock written all over her face, not just at what had happened, but at who had done it. Her mind couldn't process how the man she trusted, the one she'd shared laughter and life with, could turn her home into something unrecognizable. David Treblecock was found nearby, dazed and unsteady, muttering words that made no sense. He didn't run, he didn't resist. He just stared into nothing, like a man who'd stepped out of his own body. Officers led him out carefully, unsure what to make of what they were hearing, and then, without warning, he began to speak. In a low, detached tone, the kind that chills you more than screaming ever could, David told officers he had been following divine orders. He said he hadn't acted out of anger, but out of obedience. The words he used were hauntingly clear. Jesus made me do it. For the officers who'd seen just about everything, those 5 words were enough to stop them in their tracks. One detective later said it felt like standing in a doorway between sanity and madness, Bach one step away from sense, one step away from something much darker. Back at the station, the recording of that statement would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in the case. Every word, every pause, every inflection dissected by lawyers, psychologists, and investigators alike. The question was no longer just what David did, it was why. Was he truly consumed by delusion, or was this the start of a carefully crafted defense? When detectives retraced his steps from that morning, they started seeing things differently. The way he'd locked the doors, how he had isolated the dog so no one would be interrupted, the fact that he had deleted files from a computer days before. None of that looked random. None of it looked like someone out of touch with reality. It looked like planning cold, calculated, terrifying in its quiet precision. Yet, even with all that evidence, something about David's demeanor didn't fit the mold of a typical criminal. He wasn't angry, wasn't defensive. He seemed detached, as if he'd accepted what he did as necessary. To him, it was a mission completed. That's what made it even harder to comprehend. Meanwhile, as word spread through Cheryl, the shock rippled through every street and school hallway. The Baylius family wasn't just known Don, they were loved. Lauren's smile, her twin sister's laughter, their mom's warmth. This was the family people pointed to as a symbol of resilience after hardship. Neighbors came to the scene in disbelief, leaving flowers, drawings, and soft toys on the lawn. The sight of that quiet home wrapped in yellow tape broke everyone's hearts. Parents hugged their kids tighter that night. Conversations at kitchen tables across town turned into whispered prayers. By evening, blue and purple ribbons, Lauren's favorite colors, began appearing on mailboxes and tree trunks. Churches opened their doors for vigils. The sound of candles being lit replaced the sound of sirens. People didn't need to know the details. They already knew enough. A bright, young life had been lost, and the person responsible wasn't a stranger from the shadows. He was. He was someone who had been invited in with love. As Allison recovered in the hospital, surrounded by family and community support, detectives and prosecutors began preparing for what would be one of the most complex trials the county had ever seen. The facts were horrifying, but the psychology behind them was a maze of contradictions. David's defense team wasted no time in building their argument, insanity. They painted him as a man overtaken by paranoia and delusion, someone who'd lost the ability to separate his thoughts from reality. They said he believed he was chosen for some higher purpose, that he'd been hearing voices, receiving divine signals, that the tragedy on Noy Street wasn't the act of a killer, but of a mind consumed by illness. But prosecutors saw it differently. They saw intent, not confusion. They saw preparation, not panic. They believed David's so-called delusions were an excuse, a cover for a man who wanted control and used religion as a shield. They pointed to his confession the week before about betrayal, guilt, and dark secrets, and argued this was not sudden madness. It was an escalation. The phrase, "Jesus made me do it," echoed across every headline, every news broadcast, every dinner conversation. It became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of how blurred the line between evil and insanity can be. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Psychologists were brought on TV to explain what could drive a person to believe such things. And through it all, Allison stayed silent. She didn't need to speak for the world to understand her pain. Her silence said enough. In those weeks after the crime, Cheryl wasn't just mourning a loss, it was questioning its own sense of safety. People locked doors that had never been locked before. Parents double-checked windows. Kids asked questions their parents didn't know how to answer. But amidst that grief, the community rallied. Fundraisers were held to help the Belius family recover. School teachers made memory boards for Lauren. A mural of bright sunflowers, I Left Team, her favorite, was painted near the playground she used to run through. The story that started as one family's nightmare became a collective vow, a promise that Lauren's name would not be forgotten and that Allison and her surviving children would never stand alone again. And yet, behind every act of kindness, there lingered the same haunting question that kept prosecutors awake at night. If David truly believed his actions were divinely guided, did he ever know the difference between faith and delusion? Because if he didn't, how do you punish someone who doesn't know he's guilty? And if he did, how do you ever forgive him? That question, the one that sits between justice and mercy, would soon become the center of a courtroom battle that divided an entire town. And for Allison, who had already survived the unimaginable, that fight was only just beginning.
The court finds that Mr. Treblecock lacked criminal responsibility by reason of mental disease or defect.
After Judge Michael Dwyer issued his ruling, there was stunned silence in the courtroom. Then there were sobs as Lauren's mother, Allison Belius, and other family members burst into tears.
It's just a travesty of justice for this to happen. This monster should never be able to walk the face of this earth again, as far as I'm concerned.
Also expressing disappointment outside the courtroom, prosecutor John Loopy.
I disagree with the court's verdict, but I respect the court's verdict.
In her closing arguments, Loopy played an audio tape of David Treblecock's interview with a state police investigator after Lauren's death.
For the courts, I'm not crazy.
And Loopy argued Treblecock knew killing Lauren was wrong and was aware of the consequences. But Judge Dwyer said the most convincing testimony came from Dr. Lawrence Farrago. He was originally hired by the prosecution, but because of his findings, ended up testifying for the defense.
Everything he looked at and studied pointed to the conclusion that the defendant suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and this, without question, caused the defendant to lack the capacity to know or appreciate, one, the nature and consequences of his conduct, and two, that his conduct was wrong.
Judge Dwyer says from this point, 2 psychiatrists will evaluate Treblecock. If it's determined he has a dangerous mental disorder, he'll be sent to a secure mental facility for 1 year. After that, he can be held for additional 2-year periods of time. Reporting from the Oneida County Courthouse, I'm Jessica Kane.
A courtroom is just a stage for a tug of war, 2 stories, each fighting for your attention, each swearing it's the truth. The case against David Treblecock was no different. For the 12 folks in the jury box, this was no simple whodunit. They faced 2 wildly different versions of the same man. The defense rolled out their big guns, a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Expert after expert hit the stand, painting a dark picture. Delusions that hijack reality, voices whispering twisted commands, a mind in full meltdown mode. According to their story, David's spiral started long before that awful morning. The paranoia that made him suspicious of coworkers, the Bible clutched like armor, these were all symptoms, not quirks. And when the worst happened, David was already lost in a nightmare world where Lauren wasn't a child but an evil force to be destroyed. In his mind, he believed he was a holy warrior, following orders from above. Their shrinks swore David didn't understand right from wrong. He wasn't a monster, just a broken man, fighting a battle nobody else could see. In the moment, they claimed, he couldn't stop himself. Justice, they argued, meant treatment, not punishment. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. Sure, maybe David was troubled, but those expert witnesses didn't erase the timeline, the planning, the confessions, the pattern. Remember, before all this, David spilled his darkest secrets to Allison: addiction, cheating, even a past with a minor. Was it just fate that his obsession turned deadly toward a 6-year-old girl? The prosecution said no way. They hammered home the details: locking up the dog, trashing a computer's hard drive, barricading doors. Would a totally crazed guy think to cover his tracks? Or was this a predator working his plan to the letter? Everyone watching, let's be real. It's terrifying to face the gap between sickness and evil. Who's responsible when reality breaks? Should pain get punishment or a shot at healing? For the jury, these weren't just legal questions, they were gut punches. On one side, doctors said David was legally insane. On the other, hard facts showed he knew exactly what he was doing. As lawyers wrapped up, the Bailius family waited in agony. The jury stepped out, the entire room holding its breath. In that silence, it wasn't just a killer on trial, it was the whole system. For the Bailius family, waiting for that jury verdict felt like torture. Day after day, they pinned their hopes on 12 regular folks, believing justice would finally honor Lauren's memory. Then the word came down: the jury had reached a decision. The courtroom held its breath, every eye locked on those jurors, faces unreadable. And then came the shocker: not guilty by reason of insanity. Just like that, everything flipped. To Lauren's family, it felt like another attack. Their little girl was gone, and now the system itself dealt a second blow. David Treblecock wouldn't go to prison, he'd go to a locked psych hospital. But here's the kicker: periodic reviews meant one day he could walk free. Audience, imagine that pain. The man who destroyed your world might get his freedom back. For Allison Bailius, grief turned to white-hot rage. She fought in that bloody bedroom, and now she had to fight all over again just to keep her daughter's killer behind bars. But from that heartbreak, something powerful was born. Allison transformed from grieving mom into a warrior for change. She realized the law was broken, wide open for monsters to slip through and someday walk free.
I don't care if he's in a lockdown facility for mental health or a prison. I just want to know that he's not anywhere where he can hurt anybody else, because he will.
2 years ago, Allison Bailius was stunned to find out that the man who killed her daughter was going to be held in the mental health system, not in prison. David Treblecock killed 6-year-old Lauren Bailius, brutally stabbing her back in 2011 in the home in Sherrill that he shared with Allison.
And I don't think he would have stopped until we were all dead that day.
Allison thinks he's locked up, but because he's in the mental health system, she's not sure.
There's nothing for us, no protection, and we never know when he'll get out.
She does not feel safe, not for herself or for her surviving children.
He's got no criminal record, so if he is discharged at any time, then there's no warning to anybody else that he's done the things that he's done.
What Allison is advocating for now is something she's calling Lauren Sylvia's Law. It would make us keep better track of people who kill, and she's already getting a lot of support. She has over 20,000 petition signatures.
We think a murder is a murder, no matter the circumstances. He knowingly took the life of a child and should have to pay for that, and she'd have to stay someplace for at least 25 years, hopefully for the rest of his life.
And in the name of her daughter, and to protect her remaining family, Allison is fighting for a change in the law.
So she channeled pure mom energy into a cause to make sure nobody else would ever face the same nightmare she did. That's where Lauren's Law started. Allison worked with lawmakers, campaigned, showed up at every hearing, telling her painful story again and again. She wanted it simple. If you dodge prison for a violent crime by pleading insanity, you still get the same minimum sentence. For David, that meant at least 25 years before parole, no shortcuts, no loopholes. The fight was brutal, but Allison never backed down. Her voice became a force. By 2012, Lauren's Law was signed in New York State. And here's the hope, folks. Lauren's memory now shields families all over. Her name isn't just a headline, it's a shield, a legacy. Alex and Leah, Lauren's siblings, grow up in a world changed forever by her story, but the law that bears her name will protect countless kids, moms, and families for years to come. So when you think of Lauren Bilius, remember, she wasn't just a victim, she was a girl with a giving heart. In life, she gave away her hair just to help someone else. And in death, her story became a gift for all of us, a legacy of safety and hope.